Good morning, everybody. On behalf of Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg, and myself, we welcome you to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. For the past almost 15 years, Saturday mornings have been synonymous with Illegal Curve. We've been there each and every Saturday for you, covering the Winnipeg Jets, covering the world of hockey. Top to bottom, Illegal Curve and Saturdays have been together as one. Regretfully, due to changing life circumstances that we are all experiencing, today is our final edition of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. We say that with a heavy, heavy heart. We don't come to this decision lightly. We've worked hard for many years. It's okay, buddy. There's no need to tear up. It's emotional. I get it. We've worked hard for many years to bring this program to you in all its various forms. Back on radio, now on our social media platforms. For all of us who listen on podcast version, Spency's got it. We say good morning and welcome to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. April Fool's Day!
Oh, there we go. Wow, Drew.
We're not ending the show, guys.
I'm not going to lie, Drew.
This is an April Fool's joke.
Even though I knew that you were doing that and it was kind of painful, I'm not going to lie. That actually was kind of depressing. I was actually secretly getting really sad. I was like, this is really depressing. Can you stop?
No, Dave, those were real tears. I wasn't joking there. I was crying.
I know. Look, you got one person though. One person was like, hold on, I'm going to go to them. Coffee and TV said, "Oh no." So you got one person, Drew. A lot of others though, were onto your shtick, and a lot of others were knew what day it was, and unfortunately figured it out.
It only happens once every 7 years. That usually, at least,
unless it's a leap year.
Unless it's a leap year, and I don't want to factor that in. It only happens about once every 7 years that the April Fool's Day falls on a Saturday. So you got to let us have a little bit of fun.
Now I'm gonna have to put a disclaimer on the website. The show is not, in fact, going away. Although Drew didn't say the post game show was being killed.
No, just said
just Saturday morning.
Yeah, don't worry. Anyways, that was our hilarious version of April Fool's Day. Let's get started for real on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show.
For more than a decade, Saturdays and Illegal Curve have been synonymous with one another. With insight, analysis, and interviews regarding the Winnipeg Jets, the Manitoba Moose, and all around the NHL, here are Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg, and your host, Drew Mindell. The Illegal Curve Hockey Show starts now.
Good morning, Winnipeg. Good morning, Manitoba. For all those joining us live this morning on our YouTube channel and all of our social media platforms, we say good morning, universe, and welcome to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. No, you can't get rid of us that easily with Dave Minuk, with Ezra Ginsburg. I'm your host, Drew Mindell, here for the next couple of hours to talk about the Winnipeg Jets. The race to the playoffs continues. 6 games to go. 6 games to go for the Jets, 6 games to go for the Calgary Flames, 8 games to go for the Nashville Predators. Which of those teams are going to make it in? We'll talk about all of that on this morning's program. Look back at last night's Jets victory, a much-needed victory over the Detroit Red Wings. Get you set for tomorrow against the New Jersey Devils. And, of course, talk about the future and foundation of this Winnipeg Jets franchise. Gentlemen, it's good to see you both. It's only been about 10 hours since we last got together, but 10 hours apart from you guys is just too much time in my books. So it's good to see you both back and at it on this Saturday morning.
Yeah, we should have just rolled it into the Saturday show, last night's post-game show, but Drew, you mentioned foundation. I said that I don't want to talk about foundation after what happened to my house last year. So if we could just use a different word to describe
How about structure?
Structure is better. Let's go with Jet structure. But yeah, obviously, a lot has happened over the last week, including a very disappointing road trip. But I mean, the Jets got everything they wanted last night except a Flames loss, right? And Vancouver was doing their best job, but I mean, that's just what Calgary does. They go to extra time, right? So huge win, an explosion of goals. And obviously we're going to get into tomorrow's Devils game, but if the Jets are able to, turn this into a winning streak here, then it's going to go a long way in clinching that last playoff berth. Because as we know, the games next week against Calgary and Nashville are pretty much, that's the season right there. That's probably going to decide who goes into the playoffs. And, so a win against the Devils would definitely help, but you had to start off this homestand with a big win against the Red Wings, and they did.
Well, you mentioned the games next week, and you mentioned the Flames game last night, and I don't know anybody how many people stayed up to watch the end of it, but the Canucks had that lead until a late Flames power play with about 4 minutes to go. They tied it up on the power play, maybe even less than that. Then they actually had another power play in regulation where they could have won. It goes to overtime where the Flames win. They get their 2 points that they absolutely desperately needed to keep pace with the 2 points that the Jets got last night against the Red Wings. So, what we have here are two teams that have been limping to the playoffs, and the Jets, you look at their schedule, it's a harder schedule than that of the Calgary Flames. You look at the Flames schedule, which I have up on my second screen here. They have the Ducks, they have the Blackhawks, they have the Jets. Obviously, we know about that game coming up on Wednesday, which is going to be a massive tilt in downtown Winnipeg. They have the Canucks next Saturday in Vancouver. Then they finish with the Predators and the Sharks. 4 of the 6 are at home for the Flames, and really, except for the game against the Jets, they're all against non-playoff teams. Whereas we know the Jets' schedule is more difficult than that. Devils, very good team. Flames, we know that. Predators, we know what they are. The Sharks, well, that's a team the Jets have been having trouble with all season long. And then they finish with the Wild and the Avs, 2 teams that are certainly playoff teams in the Western Conference. So,
and they could still be fighting for first in the Central by then. So, like those games against the Wild and the Avalanche could have meaning for those teams too. And I just wanted to point out, boys, and then Dave, jump in here. The Jets have the tiebreaker with Calgary too, so they're really 3 points behind. It's regulation wins. If you look at the regulation wins, the Jets have 41 and the Flames have 33. So, I mean, you don't have to be a mathematician like my great dad to be able to figure that one out. The Jets, the Flames are not going to catch the Jets.
Well, you might not have to be a mathematician, but you do need some reading comprehension, Ginsburg, because the Jets have 41 regular and overtime wins. The Flames have 33. It's regulation wins. It's 32-28 in favor of the Jets.
Sorry. You're right. Yep. But again, that's going to, I mean, in theory, the Flames could tie the Jets or pass the Jets, but it's not.
Look, if they do that, if they did that, then the Jets would be behind them anyways, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
The Jets have
you're right, Drew. You're right, Drew. I had the wrong numbers. I was looking at the wrong column on NHL.com. I apologize. But the point is, the Jets have the tiebreaker.
You're 100% right about that. And a nicer person than me would have just let it go, but I'm not that person. You know that I have to throw you under the bus at every opportunity I get. So that was just me living up to my reputation of trying to sabotage you at each and every opportunity. So good morning to you for that as well. Let's talk about this. We'll get into.
Oh, I don't get to be part of the preamble.
You do. Go ahead. Sorry, I apologize, Dave M.
I'm done with the show.
You're done. You're out. Okay. There's Dave M's had enough.
I'm officially removing myself from the chat.
There you go.
Hello, everybody. I am Dave and Ezra Ginsburg.
You've been wanting to do that for the last 48 hours. You've just
ever since I figured it out.
Yeah, just found out about that.
Drew, I'm worried that Dave's not getting enough sleep here. I'm getting, like between Will, the neck snapping guy, and whatever that just was.
I don't know what that was either.
That was my plea for help and attention.
Well, in both cases, it was successful, I would say.
Dave, the last 14 years of the show has been my plea for help.
No, I mean, I just gonna throw in my 2 cents if I could.
Go ahead, please.
Drew, thank you.
Okay, sorry, Dave. That's enough out of you. Now go ahead.
No, nothing. I just think that it's just an interesting situation to set the way it set itself up and the way the Jets have played this. But yeah, you're gonna have to have you have luck right now. You have a Devils team that's playing tonight. We talked about this on yesterday's show, but it's worth pointing out again. And you have a Flames team that's playing on Tuesday night or Wednesday. Is it Wednesday night?
The Flames play Tuesday and then
Tuesday night. Yeah, they play in Chicago, right? They play in Chicago, I think, and then
Chicago.
home to Chicago, and then
Yeah.
and the funny part is, you say these are easy games for the Flames, but the Flames have not shown that any game is easy. Like, guys, they played against the Canucks and they had to come back and win. And apparently it was I wasn't watching, so I can't say it, but I just saw the comments on Twitter. It could just been irate Jets fans, but evidently the penalty that Pettersson was handed that tied the game was a phantom high stick. So
I admittedly, I was watching it in bed on my phone, so I didn't have a big screen, but it looked to me like a legitimate high stick that it caught the Flames player in the ear. So I wasn't quite sure about that. And
I just saw, and again, that could just
sort
be
of tired and sort of falling asleep, but I thought it was a legitimate high stick.
Yeah, I don't. Anyways, the point is that the Flames haven't shown. I mean, they had to come back against the Canucks, so I just think that is worth noting because I mean, look, I believe as he said, Markstrom was in net, and when I looked, he had given up 4 goals on 14 shots.
Yeah.
So I mean, Calgary is not by any stretch of the imagination got it together, because if you're now the Wranglers on the other hand, their goaltender is phenomenal, and he's leading the AHL in every category, but I don't think he's ready for primetime just yet. And so the fact is that it's not an easy situation for Calgary. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. As he said, next week is going to be fascinating. See for the Jets how it. I mean, you obviously can't overlook the Devils because they're the Devils. But the reality is you have to. This is the Nashville and Calgary games are going to be pretty fun to watch.
Yeah, and they are. And I mean, and this is sort of the exciting time of the season now for everybody here. It sort of feels a little bit anticlimactic because it's taken such a tailspin to make these games as exciting or as monumental as they're going to need to be. That's and Matthew says that the Flames player lifted Pettersson's stick into his own face, which certainly that was
the comment that a lot of people were saying. So.
Right. Okay. Well, the refs made the call, and the Flames, take advantage of it.
I can't add anything to this conversation because I didn't watch the game. So.
Well, you went to bed nice and early there, big boy.
Nice and early.
You cuddled up and went to Dreamland, did you?
Brushed my teeth, put my PJs on, went to bed, Drew.
Yeah, but Dave was watching upstairs. You could have gone upstairs and watched with him. You didn't have to stay.
No, I was downstairs at that point.
Oh, okay.
I was go down after the show. Come on, I unplug, go right down, have a little post amble with
Dave's told me that I'm welcome to anything in his house, but he doesn't want me to come up to his bed and snuggle with him.
Yeah, as soon as I hear Ginsburg on the stairs, I immediately cut him off. I run down. I'm like, whoa, big fella.
This is Dave has a padlock on his bedroom.
Yeah, I've got one of those at the bar where the VIP it's closed. I'm like, no. This entrance is not open to you. Please go around the back.
A red stanchion keeping Ezzy out of the areas that he's not allowed to go to at Dave's house. What I wanted to talk about, so obviously the Jets got the win last night, which we touched on in extensive detail on the post-game show, and it was a good win, and there was everything that the Jets needed. Mm-hmm. But, I still don't know that the way the lines are currently constructed is going to be a long-term solution. I mean, we talked about it. Scheifele on the wing, it worked last night. Now, if you look at the advanced stats and you look at that line of Connor, Dubois, and Scheifele, they weren't great. So, again, they scored, and, Connor had a goal, Scheifele had a goal, Dubois had scoring chances. So it was effective in terms of puck in the net, which is something the Jets team has not been doing really at all for the last couple of months. But long-term, and long-term could even be Sunday, although I don't know that they're going to switch things up that quickly. I just don't know that line is going to be a successful line long-term. We talked ad nauseum about Connor, Dubois, and Ehlers, and it just doesn't seem like it's going to happen. So I ask you guys in this case, what do you think for the final 6 games of the season, the Jets lineup needs to be the forward-wise to maximize the talents that they have and ensure that they're playing their best possible hockey from now until the end of the regular season?
Yeah, it's really the most important question because we know, with the exception of a couple tweaks, guys, that the D pairings, we know what the D pairings are going to be most likely, mm-hmm. right? Like if, Morrissey and, sometimes Bonus will break up Morrissey and DeMello, but most likely you're talking about Morrissey, DeMello, Dylan Pionk, and then Sandberg and Schmidt, right? And then Kyle Capobianco and Logan Stanley, your 7th and 8th defenseman, right? So really what they have to figure out are the forward lines. And I called it the Nemesnikov conundrum. But really, Drew, it's not just the Nemesnikov conundrum, right? Like it's the Scheifele conundrum because, look, Scheifele and Wheeler is not working, right? Like we've gone over this going back to the years 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago when it was Connor, Scheifele, Wheeler, right? Like that line just isn't good enough defensively, and they don't drive enough offense, I should say, at even strength. And, I'm with you guys. We've talked about this a lot. Like, Dubois, Connor, Ehlers, that makes the most sense. But for whatever reason, Rick Bowness doesn't want to go with that. But Rick Bowness even said, guys, after practice that, this is possible that it's not going to be a long-term solution. So,
he said that it might even change in the game last night.
Right.
He said that, he said to Scheifele, and he said to Scheifele, I believe, look, Mark, if it's not working, tap me on the shoulder and we'll figure something else out. They just needed to try something different. It ended up working in terms of the goal scoring, but
sure. But you're also playing a Red Wings team
yes.
that isn't very good, right? And when you're talking about the Devils, we know who they have up the middle: Nico Hischier, Jack Hughes, and Eric Halla is their third line center. But Hischier and Hughes, like, I think, I would be shocked if once we get into the playoffs, and I realize that the Jets haven't clinched yet, but we think they're going to get in. And I just don't see, Scheifele.
you think they're going to get in?
Well, sure. I agree. I mean, it's not, but let's just say that it's still, they still have some work to do, as we know, right?
Right.
But I don't see it, Dave, in a playoff series. Like, I just don't see Scheifele. I don't see you going with Nemesnikov as your second line center. I mean, Scheifele's a better center than Nemesnikov, like, just pure offensively, right? So, it's tough to really know right now what you're going to do here, because, I mean, naturally you put Scheifele back as centering, but, Scheifele, Wheeler, and Ehlers, like, that just doesn't work. So, I mean, the obvious one here to move up into the top six is Nino Niederreiter. And I'm not sure, if that was what you guys were thinking as well, but to me, that would be the natural move. I like Niederreiter in the top six, and then, like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, if it's between Niederreiter and Nemesnikov on the third line, I would be putting Nemesnikov on the wing on the third line. And then obviously, he can take faceoffs in whatever situations he needs to. But I don't see, I could see, maybe Scheifele starting on the wing against the Devils and playing another few games, but I don't see it for the last 6 games of the year.
Well, the only thing I would say is that I think as he's right. I think, first of all, you're going to see that continue, because even though the numbers, Drew, didn't bear out that it was super successful against a Detroit team that had played the night before, at the end of the day, like, it's a 1-game sample, right? And so you want to kind of see what happens as they get more comfortable. I mean, it is a move from center to go to wing, and it's an adjustment, right? And you still saw instances of Mark Scheifele trying to play almost as if he's the center and not a winger. So, like I said, I think that's an interesting conundrum for the Jets, but I think that they'll maybe have look, unless they get absolutely caved by the Devils tomorrow, I suspect that you'll see that, because, the whole point of the complaints, if you will, with Paul Maurice was the line blender was out too frequently, and you didn't get an opportunity to see these lines. Now, yes, I'm on board. I've been on board as saying, Dubois should play with Connor and Ehlers. But yesterday, the Ehlers, Nemesnikov, Wheeler line worked. And quite honestly, we looked at a Wheeler who looked somewhat rejuvenated from the way he had looked previously. So, yeah, I was vocally on board saying reduce Blake Wheeler's minutes to get his legs a little fresher, or reduce his role. And yet yesterday he looked kind of like Blake Wheeler of old to a certain degree. So I'm not saying that you couldn't put Morgan Bear in there, or Nino Niederreiter, and they would similarly, because I think Nikolai Ehlers was the driver yesterday, and I think he was going, and as a result, I think he got his line going. But I think that, like I said, that line seemed to work. Now we're working with a very small sample size, admittedly, only the 1 game, but at the same time, you do wonder what it will look like. As he's right, you're not going to keep Vlad Nemesnikov, who is a Swiss Army knife, even though he's not Swiss, but he is a guy who's shown versatility at any of the 3 positions. He can play center, he can play right, he can play left. And that's good. And same as Nino Niederreiter, right? He also can play. So that's good when you have, Jeff Hamilton asked Rick Bowness about it, right? He said, it's nice to have guys who are low maintenance and are kind of put me in. So that to me is an interesting one. But again, like I said, we'll see how it looks against a team like the Devils, who again will have played tonight, but they're a better team than the Detroit Red Wings. So if the Jets can improve, and I as Peter's saying, and I just had acknowledged that Peter in the chat, I should say, is saying it's a 1 game, and I agree it is 1 game, but then you see what it looks like in a second game, and if it looks good and it looks better in a second game, then you see, especially with these big matchups coming up, Ezzy. You see how it looks against the Devils and how it looks against the Flames.
Right. And I think the problem I guess I have is like the thing with Niederreiter is I don't really have a huge issue with him on the third line because he adds offensive punch. But as we know, Niederreiter is a guy that like he has to have the puck. Like he's a shooter, right? He's not a distributor. And I don't know if his line mates are, I just don't know if that's the best fit there for Niederreiter, right? Like I think, he gives you maybe a little bit more offense than Nemesnikov would on the third line, or maybe, Morgan Barron would on the third line. But I just think that Morgan Barron on the fourth line, then he's not getting enough time. Like he is getting, his minutes on the PK, Dave.
Yeah.
But I think it buries Morgan Barron a little bit, who I think has played really well. Like I think, Barron deserves those elevated minutes, right? Whether, that ends up being on the second line or third line. So that's what happens when you have Scheifele in the middle. Nemesnikov then pushes Niederreiter down. So, I guess, we know that Connor and Dubois guys are not, that's the pair that they're not breaking up. So I don't know if that means that you go, Scheifele, Ehlers, Niederreiter. I like that line a lot. And then you go Connor, Dubois, Wheeler. But we know that, Wheeler, struggled offensively at times. But that's what I would probably do. My ideal six, Drew, would be Connor, Dubois, Wheeler, and then I'd go Scheifele, Ehlers, and Niederreiter.
And I understand completely where you're coming from with that perspective. I mean, with Nemesnikov, I mean, he's a guy who was playing a depth role on the other teams that he's been on this season. He's not a guy that was, getting, headline minutes. He comes here and he's really being relied on to be, to play in a heavier role. I don't know that long term at this stage of his career that he can necessarily stand up to those minutes against the elevated talent. I mean, like you said, he's, if these lines stay together, he's going to be going up against, some really talented centermen on the New Jersey Devils tomorrow night. I mean, and again, second half of back-to-back, yes, but we saw New Jersey.
But they play Chicago, so that's really only like half of a game.
Fair enough. We saw New Jersey against the Jets not that long ago, and New Jersey, with their speed, just made the Jets look like a very slow hockey team. And I don't know that playing a speed game is necessarily going to, play into the strengths of Nemesnikov at this stage of his career. And so the Jets, again, last night was great in that they relieved the pressure. The boiling pot of water got the lid taken off of it, and it's no longer rattling and making a whole bunch of noise. But it's still a long ways away from being, a nice cool pot of water. It can quickly get turned up again, heat-wise, and start to overflow.
You're gonna cook some pasta here, Drew, or what?
We made some oatmeal earlier, so
nice.
mean, the oatmeal analogy
was it Quakers?
Better. It wasn't.
Quakers puts out a nice oatmeal.
Okay, I'll be honest, I don't know the brand that it was. Laura put it on the stove. I wasn't paying that much attention to it. But, again, the Jets are stepping up against the New Jersey Devils, and they're going to have to even elevate their game even more.
1 point behind the Hurricanes, the Devils are, Drew, and the Rangers are only 1 point behind the Devils. So like we talked about a month ago, I feel like, looked like the Devils and the Rangers were locked in, but basically similar to the Central, the Devils could finish 1, 2, or 3. We know they're not going to be in a wild card spot, but so, these points are huge for the Devils because they obviously want to finish first in the division.
Right. Look, it's a third game in 4 nights for the Devils. So, the Jets are fortunate to be catching them where they are, on the schedule. And, it's going to be similar for the Calgary Flames on Wednesday, that it's going to be a 3 and 4 nights, at that point in time for the Jets. And the Jets don't need to apologize for that because
they had to deal with it already in the season.
That's right. They've had to play their share of back-to-back. So there's no question that it's just the way the schedule falls, but it's incumbent on the Jets to take advantage of that. And that is the big lingering question. Can this team take advantage of that, or do they play one good game against a not very good Detroit Red Wings team and then get fat on themselves and not match the effort again? And I know, it's foolish of me to read too much into the latter half of the third period last night when it's 6-0 and the game is done and away with. But I wonder, those 2 goals the Devils scored, the Red Wings scored, fine, the power play goal, whatever. But, I don't know that Neil Pionk needs to take that penalty that then leads to the power play opportunity. Just, I wonder if that, maybe giving up those 2 goals in the latter half of the third period allows the team to say to themselves, hey, look, we got away from what we need to do that's successful, and this other team scored 2 goals. We need to ensure.
I don't think those 2 goals are that meaningful, Drew. I like
that's fair.
I think you would not like, you would prefer that, you got the shutout for Hellebuck, right?
Right.
But I mean, I think that those are garbage. I mean, that's the way I look at it. I don't think there's going to be any spillover. I think the Jets got their big goal explosion that we've been waiting for, right? Like, we thought it would happen against Arizona. We thought it would happen against San Jose. It never came. So you score 6 goals, and those goals are, like the Perron goal was fluky, right? Like it was, I don't put too much stock in it. I think, they're feeling probably the most confident they've felt about their game in quite a while.
But the last time they got a big goal explosion against the Oilers on that Saturday night where Jack Campbell couldn't stop anything, it's not like that carried over. That goal explosion occurred, and then they were back to really square one when it came to goal scoring.
But Drew, that game was ugly. That was a 7-5 game, right? Like, it wasn't
right.
It wasn't like they were up 6. I mean, you're up 6-0. It's a natural tendency to say, okay, we've got this one in the bag, and so it's kind of, you take your foot off the gas. I mean, I think it's a natural thing. And like, look, it'll be very interesting. I mean, I think what we're saying, and I think we all are in agreement, that the carry over to what you're going to see against the New Jersey Devils on Sunday, with the only expected change being that Josh Morrissey will return to the lineup and Logan Stanley would come out. That would be my guess. Again, we don't know if Carson Kuhlman, obviously he was the answer to why the Jets weren't able to score goals. And so we don't know if he'll stay in, but he most likely will. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this team looks on or how they, perform on Sunday. So that's why I think tomorrow's postgame show will be an interesting one. But for right now, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, right? I mean, look, I've long since, just to quickly kind of return to the line situation. I know we're going to go to break right away, but
yeah.
I've long said that Blake Wheeler would play well in a third line role alongside Adam Lowry, and insert any, if it's Vlad Nemestikov, I don't care who it is. I think you could have a solid contributing third line. So anyways, we'll see what happens.
We're game 76, right, Dave? Like, that's not going to, if it would have happened, it would have happened already, right?
I was just going to say, the only thing I would like to see is Morgan Barron get elevated in the lineup, because I think he's merited that. And so I think Morgan Barron being on the 4th line is a bit of a disservice. And I know he's in his first full year. And so whatever.
That's why I called it the Nemesnikov conundrum.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Because, right, like, you can't take him out of the top 9, and you can't take Niederreiter out of the top 9. So
Wheeler. But we've talked about that a lot.
Well, top 9. I mean, I think Wheeler at the very least would be a third line guy. And I agree. I mean, based on his play, like, look, he scored a nice goal yesterday, really nice pass from Ehlers. But Rick Bowness has not put him in a third line role, right? So I just don't see it happening at this point in the season. But
we will find out when we come back. Frank Seravalli from dailyfaceoff.com joins us for more Jets talk, more NHL talk. Sean Reynolds still to come in the bottom of the second hour. It's a Saturday morning, the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. We're not going anywhere except a commercial break. Stay tuned. Much more to come. We're live on YouTube and all of our social media platforms.
Keeping Winnipeg laughing for over 30 years. Rumors, Canada's longest-running comedy club, bringing you the biggest laughs from the best comedians on the planet. Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Jon Stewart, Dennis Miller, Brad Garrett, the greats, and all the up-and-comers too. When was the last time you laughed out loud? Make it a great night out with friends, or book your office or birthday party. Even a fundraising event at Rumors. Get all the details and dates on upcoming shows at rumorscomedyclub.com.
Hi, Ez. A strange question for you. But why are you lying on the ground being crushed by a piano?
Well, Drew, I definitely tried to carry this baby grand piano down the stairs by myself, and somehow I failed miserably.
Right. I'm sorry. That was a silly question on my part. My apologies. Would you like me to call Rolly's Transfer Moving and Storage to help you move the piano? They are the most experienced piano moving company in Winnipeg, after all.
Yes, please call Rolly's and hurry. This piano is very, very heavy.
Rolly's Transfer Moving and Storage offers stress-free residential moving services while taking great care of your personal belongings, including your piano. At Rolly's, no job is too big or too small. For more information, visit Rolly's.com.
Hi, it's Drew from Illegal Curve here. Selling your home can be stressful, but it wasn't for me. Thanks to my friends at Zappia Group Realty, they made the process so easy. My home sold within 48 hours and with multiple offers. Zappia Group Realty took care of everything with their exquisite customer service and attention to detail. If you want to sell your home for more in less time, get started by talking to Frank and Mauro Zappia of Zappia Group Realty. Online at zappiagroup.com.
Hey, Drew.
Ezzy, whoa, what a smile!
Yeah, I got my crowns done at Linden Market Dental Center, and they whitened my teeth.
I see.
They're so bright that every time I smile, they go,
"We have hockey tonight. Do you have a mouth guard to protect those pearly whites?"
"I sure do."
Whoa, they even ting through the mouth guard.
Linden Market Dental Center covers all your dental needs, from restorative to cosmetic dentistry, and will fit you with a sports guard for that active lifestyle. 877 Waverly. See lindenmarketdental.com.
So you're a pizza person, you married a wing person, but somehow your kids are salad people. You can't pick your fam, but you can pick your BP meal deal, starting from $18.99 for takeout or delivery at bostonpizza.com.
Bottom of hour number one. Welcome back to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Drew Mindell, Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg with you on this Saturday morning. Reminder, the Illegal Curve post-game show tomorrow evening, 8:45 after the Jets and the Devils. We're thrilled to welcome to the program from dailyfaceoff.com. Our good friend Frank Seravalli joins us on the program. Frank, good morning. How are you, buddy?
Pretty good, guys. How you holding up? Big win last night.
Oh, the Jets made it easy on themselves for once. So
I was like, oh, thank God they won. I can go on a legal curve today and it'll be happy.
That's right. The heart palpitations that the city of Winnipeg has been experiencing for the last 3 months got a night off at the very least. A much needed easy victory for the Winnipeg Jets, where easy has not come easy to the team as of late. Obviously, Frank brought you on to talk about the Jets, talk about the playoff races all around the league. I want to start not with last night's game because, one game against the Red Wings, yes, you take the victory. You're happy about that from the Jets' perspective. Where does this team go this offseason? I mean, they might still squeak into the playoffs, but if they do so, I don't think anybody expects that they're going to go on a run or anything like that, Connor Hellebuyck's presence notwithstanding. With all the uncertainty, with all the contracts, with the eye roll heard around the NHL earlier this week after the loss in San Jose, from your perspective and from what you're hearing, where does this franchise go from here this offseason?
I wish I had an answer for you, but I don't. And I think, to me, the biggest crux of the Winnipeg Jets offseason, everyone's focused on what happens next with Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler and the group of forwards. To me, it kind of hinges squarely on what happens next with Connor Hellebuyck. He's just like them entering the last year of his deal. They're sort of all tied together in a neat package. And if he is not going to be coming back as a free agent on the back end of that deal, I think that's priority number one to figure out an answer for the Jets. You're going to have to trade him, I think, if you're not going to bring him back on the other end and sign an extension. And so that's an important question to answer. I don't know what Connor Hellebuyck is thinking. I would imagine the Jets are thinking, let's get this guy locked up long-term. But if he wants out, then that's going to be the story of the Jets offseason if that's what happens. I have no knowledge one way or the other, but to me, I think everyone's just been focused on the wrong thing.
I would agree with that because, he's the hardest to replace, right, Frank? That's what you're getting at there. He's your Vezina Trophy winning goaltender, and the team has been built around him, obviously, in addition to Scheifele and Connor and Wheeler. So you're absolutely right. He's the big one of those three. Obviously, throw Dubois in there as well. There's a lot of moving pieces, as you know, right? I wanted to ask you, Frank, about Calgary because we're obviously focused on the Western Conference playoff race here. Nashville, I think you would agree, has been a big surprise, big sellers at the trade deadline, including selling Nino Niederreiter to the Jets. But they're 5 points back, so really it's between the Jets and the Flames right now. And kind of similar question to Drew's question about the Jets, right? Like, even if the Flames squeak into the playoffs, like, where are you going from here? Because I don't think a lot of people think the Flames are, primed for a long playoff run. I mean, you hear that, there could be a move coming up behind the bench with Daryl Sutter. You hear, a lot of players aren't the happiest with him. Jonathan Huberdeau, we know what happened there, and he obviously hasn't had anywhere close to the 115-point season. But what do you make of the Flames? They've made it interesting here. They're still 2 points back, but it's obviously been a disappointing year regardless if they get in.
Yeah, I mean, if they even get in, I think it'll be a miracle based on how poorly they've played through stretches, the lack of confidence that they've shown. But then you get a moment again like last night where it makes you think, just like it does in Winnipeg. It's like, hey, maybe this team actually could be something. And where I view the Calgary Flames is sort of where the Jets were last season. They were having a disappointing year when a lot of people felt like they were primed to be one of the contenders. I picked the Jets to win the Stanley Cup last year. So I've worn that with a badge of honor. At least I did for the first half of this year while they were leading the Central Division for a huge chunk of the season. And I kind of see them locked in the same sort of way that the Jets were. They're pot committed to the group that they have. And there's not, especially for the Flames, even more so than the Jets, there's not a lot of wiggle room in terms of the contracts that they have. The contracts for Huberdeau and Weegar don't kick in until next season. So, Huberdeau is essentially doubling his salary. Weegar, huge jump in pay. And for 8 years, plus the other guys that you have on that Flames team that you'd consider moving, they're vastly exceeding their value in terms of what they bring. Like, look at the season that, Tyler Toffoli has had. Relative to his cap hit has been incredibly impressive. Mm-hmm. Elias Lindholm, vastly exceeds his cap hit. You're not, even though they're entering the final year of their deal, you're not going to trade those guys. So I think the big question that they've been asking in Calgary is, can next year's Flames be this year's version of the Jets? And I guess you're seeing now the answer very late in the season as to why that's a pitfall to fall into.
Frank, we know that the transition from a coach to a GM is not an easy one to make, but of course, everyone here in Manitoba is hoping for the best for Barry Trotz from Dauphin. But, what was when you had a conversation, obviously, with David Poile, who was the only GM in Nashville history, what assurances did he have that Barry Trotz would be able to transition into that role as the next GM?
Yeah, the question was actually kind of pointed because I talk to scouts and front office executives every day, and they're saying, look, I know that head coaches think they can be GMs, but they're often the worst talent evaluators because they have such a narrow-minded focus and view, and it's not so much necessarily on team building. It's sometimes more individual focused. And you hear all the time the conversations between GM and coach, I want this guy, and it's sort of this back and forth where it never really works out. So why is Barry Trotz the right fit at the right time for the Preds? And the answer from David Poile is he's basically been training Barry Trotz since 1983. It's a long time. That's the time that Barry Trotz made the transition from player in Washington Capitals camp with David Poile as GM right into being a scout. And so he was a scout for a long time, then was an AHL coach before finally when David Poile went to Nashville to become NHL head coach, and it's been off to the races since then. So he has a different background that is not, sort of super focused just on coaching. It's a more holistic view of the game. And so I think that's important. Plus, he was the first sort of person in Nashville to coin the term Predators way. This is the Predators way of doing things. And I think he's, a lot of his temperament, a lot of his personality, a lot of the way that he looks at building things with a community-minded aspect, if that makes any sense, that's going to translate directly over. So there's not going to be a big gap between the only voice of the Nashville Predators that they've ever known now to Barry Trotz. So it's going to be pretty seamless in that way in terms of the way that things are run. And so I'm looking forward to seeing it. It's not often that you see a former head coach make the jump to GM, and he just seems uniquely qualified in that sense that it's not just from one perspective that he's watched the game.
Frank Seravalli of dailyfaceoff.com, our guest this Saturday morning on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Frank, you talk about coaching, and here in Winnipeg for the start of the year, it was all about Rick Bowness and how he was getting more out of this team that looked very similar to last year's team, and the great job that he was doing. And then, of course, as the tailspin for the Jets has occurred, questions of Bowness's coaching have come to the forefront as well, as they're naturally going to. When you saw the interaction, and Bowness's comments earlier in the week, did you think that maybe that got blown out of proportion, or did you think that there's a disconnect between what he wants and what certainly, what Mark Scheifele would say one of the driving forces on this team wants, and how do those two things sort of how does that get resolved with 6 games to go in the regular season?
Well, I think you got your answer last night, didn't you? Mm-hmm. I mean, you see the move to the wing, and you got the admission sort of early on. It was almost like reading between the lines of what Rick Bowness said publicly and then kind of what we heard. It's like, I don't know, me trying to convince my son to eat something that he's never tried before. Trust me, you'll like it. And if you don't, you can spit it out. And it was kind of like, if you don't like playing on the wing or it doesn't work or you're not comfortable, we'll go do something else. Don't worry. But I need you to try it. And it's a sort of leap of faith that you got from Scheifele on the buy-in. Mm-hmm. And then you also, got from Rick Bowness to be able to convince him. So how does that play itself out? I have no idea in the long term. I have no idea in the 40,000 foot view. We only have one game sample size to look at it. But I mean, I think Ken Wiebe said it. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Like, this is it. If you're going to finally, close the door and put the Preds and the Flames out of their misery, you've only got a week to do it. You need to win essentially 3-4 games and make it happen. And Detroit was such a prime opportunity to do so. And it wasn't just the win, but it's also who scored, how relieved they felt and looked, that I think, it's sort of like getting the monkey off your back. Now you feel like you can relax a bit. And that to me was a great positive sign for the Jets, that there was enough buy-in to trust the coach to say, hey, I know this looks different. This is definitely going to feel different, but let's try it.
Frank, just switching over to the Eastern Conference, obviously, we're mainly focused on the West here. You're out East, and, we're just absolutely loving that playoff race and, cheering. At least I am. I can't speak for Drew and Dave, but hoping that the Panthers get in, and our old buddy Paul Maurice, 1 point back of the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins do have a game in hand, but Florida's got Buffalo, and they have Columbus tonight, and then they've got Buffalo coming up. And I think they have another non-playoff team, maybe Ottawa coming up after that. I haven't checked the Pittsburgh schedule, but how would you assess Paul Maurice's the job he has done this year as head coach of the Panthers? I mean, not even close to the 115 or whatever point season it was last year, winning the President's Trophy. But how badly does this team need to get into the playoffs? And conversely, I mean, how devastating would it be for Pittsburgh to miss the playoffs, considering that that's all they do is make the playoffs every single year?
Yeah, it would be 17 in a row for the Penguins. I think 17 or 18. It's a long, long time. I think it's 17. And for the Panthers, I don't think that this is all on Paul Maurice, but it's been a very average coaching year, I think, is a polite way to put it. They had 122 points last year. And here's the thing,
Frank, I missed 7 points there.
It sounds funny, but 7 points is often the difference between making and missing the playoffs. Yeah. So we'll just add that on there. 122 points to now scrapping to make the playoffs. The funny thing about the Panthers and their offseason is when you talk to their general manager, you talk to other people inside their organization, and they say, we knew we were going to take a step back. When you trade off two pieces like Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar in one deal, they're not properly balanced enough to withstand a loss of someone like Weegar on defense. Their defense just isn't deep enough. It's not big enough. It can't move the puck well enough to survive. They've had question marks with their goaltending, not just with Sergei Bobrovsky, who was good last year, but this year he's struggled. And then the other big thing has been Spencer Knight and whatever he's dealing with off the ice, which sounds more like a mental health reset. That it's been a trying year. All that said, the focus from the Panthers was, at very worst, we're going to be a 7th or 8th seed. They had no thought in their mind that they'd be taking this big of a step back to potentially miss the playoffs. So will it hurt? Yes, but I don't think I think they did go into this season eyes wide open. Here's the thing with the Penguins, and they have the Bruins and Flyers back-to-back this weekend. 4 points by the Pens this weekend, and it'll basically, as I said with the Flames and Preds, it'll basically put the Panthers out of their misery. So this is a huge opportunity for Pittsburgh to get in and seal the deal. I still think at the end of the day, they will get in, regardless of whether they split this weekend, even if they lose both games. I think they're in the driver's seat, and they've shown just enough this ability to kind of turn it on when it matters most. Sort of Sidney Crosby dragging and willing this team into the playoffs. That's what I'd expect to happen.
Well, Frank, I'm contractually obligated to ask about anything Manitoban and always bring it back to somehow be Manitoba. So I'm going to take it to the battle of friendly Manitoba versus Minnesota nice, but not talking about the Jets, of course. But Dean Evanson, of course, born in Flin Flon, raised in Brandon. He's doing a heck of a job in Minnesota, a team that nobody seems to be talking about yet. They're top of the standings right now in the Central. I know you and Mike McKenna were talking about them as to whether or not they are a legit Stanley Cup contender. So what are your thoughts about these Minnesota Wilds? Are they contenders or are they pretenders?
Well, they're not pretenders, but I'm not ready to call them contenders either. They're a really good team. They can be incredibly difficult to play against. I think Philip Gustafsson has been an incredible eye-opener this year. But I also saw this same team being one of the most mentally weak and fragile teams earlier this year, and it wasn't all that long ago coming out of the All-Star break. I watched all 3 of their games coming out of the break, and I was like, that they don't have it. And the run that they've been on, 1 regulation loss in 21 games, I did not see coming. So where does this team stack up? I think in the West, the easy answer is from Colorado, who I envision to be the team to beat in the West, to the Pacific jumbled mess that's in the other side of the bracket, from 1 to 6 in that group. So I'm excluding the Kraken and Winnipeg. I don't think there's really much at all separating 1 to 6. I think it's a relative coin flip, maybe 52 or 53% shaded to one team or the other. But other than that, it's a dead heat. And I think the Wild certainly fall into that group. Would I be absolutely shocked if I woke up in June and the Wild are in the Stanley Cup final? No, I wouldn't. But I'm just not ready to label them, true bona fide contenders just yet, even as hot as this run has been.
Frank Seravalli, our guest on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show, dailyfaceoff.com is where you can find all of Frank's work. Frank, earlier this week, we heard from Marty Walsh, the new executive director of the NHL Players Association, taking over from the Fehr brothers, the Donald Fehr and his brother. In their tenure, I don't know that there was really a coherent approach from the PA's perspective, or if there was, I'm not sure what it was. What did you think of Marty Walsh's introductory press conference, and what do you think that he's going to bring to the NHLPA in terms of their dealings with the NHL and the owners, in terms of anything collective bargaining related?
I don't know what exactly he's going to bring, but I can tell you what I know the players are hoping he brings, and that's a fresh voice and a fresh approach. He's a non-hockey hire. Traditionally, the nuances of dealing with this sport and inside of it, that generally hasn't worked out all that well. But then again, whatever the NHLPA has done previously hasn't worked out either, because it's ended bloody for just about every executive director that's ever been in the role. And that includes Donald Fehr, who was pushed out unceremoniously by a vote to create this sort of succession period that he wasn't given a choice to call his own shot. They said, we're starting this whether you like it or not. And so that's important context to keep in mind. What did I make of Marty Walsh in his press conference on Thursday? I'm trying to think of a polite way to say this because it doesn't really matter, is he sounded like a hockey newborn. And if that's what he sounded like, it's because that's exactly what he is. He went to the Toronto offices of the NHLPA for the first time ever on Monday. He doesn't know the CBA. He doesn't know the people. He doesn't know the issues. And that's not a knock. How could you hire someone that just was trying to settle a railroad strike as the Department of Labor secretary, and then previously was the mayor of Boston, to expect to know the ins and outs of a really nuanced and niche situation with the NHLPA? He can't. So the answer, just to wrap on that, is it doesn't matter what he looks like today or what he sounds like today. All that's going to matter is, 6 months from now, a year from now, when he has a chance to sink his teeth in and gets up to speed, that he's ready to roll and do what the players want him to accomplish, which is grow revenue, get an international hockey calendar, be ready for the next CBA negotiations, try and get the cap moving this summer. There's a whole list of things, health and safety, health insurance, but he needs to get up to speed first.
Well, you mentioned the international hockey calendar, because I know you're a baseball guy. You're from Philly. A lot of people, even casual fans, were tuned into the World Baseball Classic. And last time I checked, both the NHL and the NHLPA like generating revenue. They like money. Both sides do.
Who doesn't?
Who doesn't? Exactly. So we know that Major League Baseball was able to finally figure out a way to put on the World Baseball Classic, and a huge success that it was. How is it that the NHL and the NHLPA can't make this a priority, or haven't been able to find a way to make this a priority, when it just seems like it would be a win-win situation all around for everybody?
I think the fact that Connor McDavid will be 28 years old by the time he can put on a Team Canada jersey for the first time in his career as a professional men's hockey player is an abysmal failure. It's an unmitigated disaster.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's gone on this long is the biggest stain, not just on Donald Fear's legacy, someone who came in championing international hockey and growing the game internationally, along with Gary Bettman on the other side, and Bill Daley, deputy commissioner. They're all going to wear the stink of that and the stain of that, and they should. I've said it's the biggest stain on all of their legacies. That said, the reason why they haven't is because the NHL tries to use international hockey as a bargaining chip. It can't be that anymore. If you are really legitimately serious and truly sincere about growing the game internationally, you have to set aside an international calendar that's a separate document from anything related to the CBA. You can't do it. You can't have this tied to that, and if you do this, we'll do that. No. That's not how it can work. You need a robust World Cup of Hockey schedule. And because that tournament has been so bastardized, 2004 to 2016 to question marks, who knows when, and we've had weird teams playing in it, and it's not truly best on best. And, by the way, it always seems to fall before the next lockout is coming. You have to really say, okay, we're introducing it again in 2025, and it's coming back in 27, 29, 31, et cetera, whatever the cadence is that you suggest. And you have to allow players to go to the Olympics. It's not just one or the other. Why can't you have both? And more to the point, if you don't find a window in time in your schedule to play the World Cup of Hockey, September wasn't ideal, I don't think, for anyone. Then you need to carve out time in February. And whatever that is, that's sort of your dead window every time that this comes up in the calendar, whether it's every 2 years or whatever it is. You play the World Cup every 4 and the Olympics every 4, so you have them in alternate years. It doesn't take a brainiac to figure this out, but it needs to stop being used as a bargaining chip.
Well, what I would say to that, and I agree with what you've said, but I don't know that the Olympics needs to be factored in. The Olympics doesn't factor into baseball. It's not like you have Major League Baseball players playing in the Olympics. It doesn't factor. The only other sport that has, professionals playing in it at the Olympic level is basketball. And they haven't really. So, if you commit to the World Cup of Hockey, can't you just sort of put the Olympics to the side, because I understand why the NHL doesn't want to be involved in the Olympics, because it doesn't generate revenue for the owners. So from a business perspective, I get it. And as long as you're committing to one best on best competition, why do you even need the Olympics there? Doesn't Connor McDavid get the same level of pride wearing the maple leaf if there's a consistent World Cup of hockey 2 years, every couple of years? It's only, recency bias that the Olympics were ever a factor.
The World Cup would be every 4 years, Drew.
Whatever the sequence is. I'm just saying that from the owner's perspective, I understand why there's no want or desire to go to the Olympics.
I just think the World Cup of hockey's been a joke.
It definitely has been. No argument there.
Yeah, so you're saying if you commit to it and you make it a thing, can you just bypass the Olympics? The answer is yes. I just don't have any faith that anyone is actually going to commit to the World Cup in a serious way, and then that the players are going to buy in. They're juiced and jacked up for the Olympics. They like the rings. They like being around the other best players in the world. They like being in the Olympic Village, and the idea of everyone around the world is watching and tuned into the Olympics. The amazing thing about the World Baseball Classic was the TV numbers. That 64% of the entire country of Japan was watching the World Baseball Classic championship game. That huge swaths of every country were watching the games that mattered. We didn't get that buy-in in the US. I don't know about Canada. I think that I heard vague rumblings about the Canadian team in the World Baseball Classic. Not a lot.
The numbers on TV were, I think, about an average Jays game is, I think, what I saw from, in terms of their numbers, which would be middling is the definition thereof.
So you're proving my point. No one in North America cares about any of these sort of fake created championships.
Yeah, I'm with Frank here. I mean, obviously, we don't know if the NHL is going to participate in the next Olympics, but I at least agree. I agree with both of your points, by the way. I can see what you're saying, but I agree with Frank. The last World Cup of hockey, even though it was exciting, I think you'd agree, Frank, for the younger generation. I think that's like the Team North America and I guess lesser so Team Europe, even though they made it to the final. I think that was exciting for kind of the 18 to 30 crowd, if you want to call it that. But
the novelty.
That's exactly. It was a novelty. So you have to get back to whatever it is. Let's go with 8 countries in the World Cup of hockey. Maybe you go 10. I'm not sure.
Okay, so what do you do with Russia? That's hockey's other big problem. It's not just Russia. It's that the rest of the countries outside of like the major powers, Sweden, Finland, Russia, US, Canada, maybe you throw in like the Czechs some years, maybe you throw in the Swiss, like whoever it is the hot team at that moment in time. It never extends past 6 interesting teams. And so you end up with, if you're going to fill out 8 teams, 2 blowouts, or if it's 10 teams, 4. Like hockey doesn't have that same runway that maybe some other sports do. It's less of a problem in the Olympics because they have like usually 12. It's 3 different groupings of 4, and you play your round robin games, and then those other teams are kind of out, and it's never really an issue.
Yeah, look,
maybe you could do that with the World Cup. I don't know why you couldn't, but
I also think, Frank, it's more the players. I might be wrong here because obviously you talk to players more than I do. It seems like the players want to go to the Olympics more than have a World Cup of hockey, and that's what was unfortunate about the last Winter Olympics. They couldn't get it going, and so it's hard to know. In an ideal world, I think we would get a World Cup of hockey every 2 to 4 years, and we would also get the Olympics. But I think that's what you're leaning at is the appetite from the star players, especially, is the Olympics over the World Cup.
I just don't understand the idea that it's one or the other. We're talking about every 2 years, alternating between World Cup and Olympics, so that every 4 years you're having 2 best on best battles. They can both be different flavors. They can be in different locations. They can still generate the money that you want from the World Cup, but why does that have to come at the expense of the Olympics?
Money. I mean, the NHL owners don't want to give up the revenue.
Okay, you're making my argument for me. This can't be about money. This can't be about a bargaining chip. The NHL wants power and control. That's it. And they don't get it because the Olympics tells them to kick rocks.
Mm-hmm.
So They go back and they say, well, we don't want to participate in this. They don't want to be our partner. Okay, well, that's what your players want, though, and that's what actually growing the game on an international scale looks like, because people in Japan are going to watch the Olympics. People pick a country that's a non-traditional hockey country and say, hey, maybe we should try that.
Yeah, and it's a good point. And, to your point, and I realize you have to think more longer term, I think is what you're saying, not just how much money are we going to make from the Olympics this year or next year, whatever.
So short-sighted.
It's growing the game internationally. And also, like you said, I mean, your star players do have a big influence. I mean, these are the guys that, Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews, the top players in the game. That's who sells tickets. That's who generates revenue at the end of the day, right?
China, Australia, go through the list of countries that the NHL would like to have some kind of footprint in. The biggest success that the NBA has had has been expanding in China and expanding elsewhere. If you are only doing a World Cup of hockey and you're only concentrating it between the 6 teams that always have ever been involved in the space, are you actually growing the game? Or are you catering or pandering to the fan bases in those countries? You're
just maintaining the game.
You're maintaining, but you're also, guess what it turns into? A cash grab. That's all.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what Drew called I remember Drew called it the World Cup of money back in 2016. Frank, last question for you.
Wait, just to put a bow on that. I was at the 2016 World Cup of Hockey, and they put it in Toronto thinking, oh man, this thing's going to be an incredible success business-wise. Half of the games were half empty, and it generated half of what they thought it would. It was a total of $50 million, which meant 25 split between 30 at the time owners and 25 million split between all 700 and some players. Yawn.
That's what they call pocket change for Drew. Last question, Frank. I like the article up on Daily Faceoff because the Jets, of course, play the Devils tomorrow. And you guys on Daily Faceoff had who's going to be the next year's Devils. I'm not sure how many people picked Montreal. I know that you picked Montreal and at least one other, maybe it was Stephen Ellis or Mike McKenna, but I think you're right. I don't think enough people are talking about how quickly the Habs are going to be able to turn this around. You mentioned Lane Hudson. It was pretty controversial that he wasn't a finalist for the Hobey Baker, even though, Logan Cooley, Matthew Knees, pretty good players.
Yeah.
But Lane Hudson looks like he's going to be a steal for the Habs on the back end. Yuri Slafkovsky, obviously first overall pick. I mean, and the Habs have 3 first round picks as well, right? So I guess just how impressed have you been with the way the Habs have been able to, retool, rebuild much quicker than other teams have been able to?
Yeah, I think when trying to answer that question is who's going to be the team that's sort of in the lottery zone now that takes the biggest step forward next season, the low-hanging fruit was Columbus, right? Like no one expected them to be in the position that they're in, challenging for the 32nd spot and Connor Bedard. And no one thinks that, teams like Chicago or pick another team that's got a real long road ahead of him are going to turn it around next year. But to me, the Canadians are a really good bet because what I think they've done with their rebuild is it's been one smart move after a smart move after a smart move, in the sense that they're not all grand slam upper deck home runs, but what they are is incremental wins. And I think the Lane Hudson pick is the perfect example because that was 62nd overall. And that was the pick that they got from the Arturi Lehkonen trade. And so you have a multitude of picks in the first and second rounds, and you have this defenseman who's on the smaller end that people have question marks about, but know that he has high-end skill and his character was off the charts. I think he won the award last year, the E.J. Maguire Award for character in the draft class. And you're like, why wouldn't we take a swing on this guy in this spot? And so it's just, incremental wins, incremental gains, one smart move after the next that I think with their forward group, it's like NHL elite caliber, I think, starting next season and beyond. And then you're looking at how do we fix our defense? How do we fix our goaltending? Well, there's questions to be answered, and it's not all going to happen overnight, but certainly a team that's trending in the right direction.
Then I have to ask you this one, Frank. Do the incremental gains include Pierre-Luc Dubois this offseason?
I knew that was coming. I knew it.
I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. Like, that was such an odd declaration on his part. I just don't know why you do it, first off, unless that's just how you truly feel and you're just like, I'm going to get this out there and rip the Band-Aid off. It was a very odd turn of events, and I'd be curious if this team does find some margin of success this summer, or this spring, excuse me, in the playoffs. Does he change his view and change his mind? I don't know, but seems like a pretty natural landing spot to me.
Time will tell. Frank Seravalli, dailyfaceoff.com, our good friend. It's always great catching up with you. We may disagree on international hockey.
That's okay. That's what makes it fun. It'd be boring if we all saw it the same way.
Exactly. The conversation is well worth it. Thank you, Frank. We'll let you get on with your Saturday. Best to you and the family.
Have a good one, guys.
Take care.
Thanks, Frank.
There he goes. Frank Seravalli, our good friend, joining us this morning on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Let's head to break. When we come back, more on the Jets, maybe some follow-up on that conversation we had with Frank. Hour number 2, Sean Reynolds up at the bottom of the hour. Don't go anywhere. It's the Illegal Curve Hockey Show on a Saturday morning.
Keeping Winnipeg laughing for over 30 years. Rumors, Canada's longest-running comedy club, bringing you the biggest laughs from the best comedians on the planet. Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Jon Stewart, Dennis Miller, Brad Garrett, the greats, and all the up-and-comers too. When was the last time you laughed out loud? Make it a great night out with friends, or book your office or birthday party. Even a fundraising event at Rumors. Get all the details and dates on upcoming shows at rumorscomedyclub.com.
Hi, Ez. A strange question for you. But why are you lying on the ground being crushed by a piano?
Well, Drew, I definitely tried to carry this baby grand piano down the stairs by myself, and somehow I failed miserably.
Right. I'm sorry. That was a silly question on my part. My apologies. Would you like me to call Rolly's Transfer Moving and Storage to help you move the piano? They are the most experienced piano moving company in Winnipeg, after all.
Yes, please call Rolly's and hurry. This piano is very, very heavy.
Rolly's Transfer Moving and Storage offers stress-free residential moving services while taking great care of your personal belongings, including your piano. At Rolly's, no job is too big or too small. For more information, visit rollys.com.
Hi, it's Drew from Illegal Curve here. Selling your home can be stressful, but it wasn't for me. Thanks to my friends at Zappia Group Realty, they made the process so easy. My home sold within 48 hours and with multiple offers. Zappia Group Realty took care of everything with their exquisite customer service and attention to detail. If you want to sell your home for more in less time, get started by talking to Frank and Mauro Zappia of Zappia Group Realty. Online at zappiagroup.com.
Hey, Drew.
Ezzy, whoa, what a smile!
Yeah, I got my crowns done at Linden Market Dental Center, and they whiten my teeth.
I see.
They're so bright that every time I smile, they go,
"We have hockey tonight. Do you have a mouth guard to protect those pearly whites?"
"I sure do."
Whoa, they even ting through the mouth guard.
Linden Market Dental Center covers all your dental needs from restorative to cosmetic dentistry and will fit you with a sports guard for that active lifestyle. 877 Waverly. See lindenmarketdental.com.
So you're a pizza person, you married a wing person, but somehow your kids are salad people. You can't pick your fam, but you can pick your BP meal deal. Starting from $18.99 for takeout or delivery at bostonpizza.com.
Welcome back to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Hour number 2 starting a little bit later than the top of the hour, but that's well worth it given the conversation we had with Frank in the last segment.
Drew, you're breathing a little bit heavy there. Did you just run back to the mic?
I think I was mid-yawn when I started talking, to be perfectly honest. That's what happened. I was a combination of speaking and yawning at the same time.
You can take your grandpa nap as soon as the show's over.
I wish I could, Mr. Ginsburg. You have no idea how much I wish I could. But as you well know with young children as well, once they stop napping, that generally means that you stop napping as well, which is...
I miss those days when Ruben and Ariella would have like weekend afternoon naps.
Yeah.
That was great. Yeah, exactly, because you could time your nap at the same time.
That's frequently what I did, but alas, my children do not do that anymore.
Now you actually coordinate your naps with Brixton.
She naps a lot more than a number of years ago. That's true. That's my dog, of course. But yes, that's exactly right. In any event, obviously great conversation with Frank. And the last question we talked about, the Pierre-Luc Dubois one, is sort of a jumping off point for this segment before we bring Sean in. It was reported earlier
You
this
might bring
week.
Spency in a second, Drew.
Well, maybe we have to. Darren Dreger was on TSN 690 in Montreal talking about Pierre-Luc Dubois and sort of talking about Elliot Friedman's comments that it's 95% that Dubois is going to Montreal, whether or not it's this offseason or after his contract expires. If the Jets, given everything we've seen around this team, in the last month, the eye roll last week, the news of the noise around Scheifele, Frank's comments about Connor Hellebuck, and he's sort of the linchpin to this whole thing. That makes a lot of sense. Maybe we have been focusing on the wrong guy. If Connor Hellebuck says that he's not interested in re-signing, don't the Jets almost by default have to then go into a complete rebuild that allegedly they're not interested in going down that road based on the comments from Dreger earlier this week, guys?
Yeah, I mean, look, and it seemed like there was a lot of what Dreger was saying was a response. I think that's what you're getting at to what Friedman said, because they're clearly, I mean, it's like, what angle are you approaching it from? Are you approaching it from Dubois' camp's angle, or are you approaching that from, the Jets' angle? Because I think everybody likes Pierre-Luc Dubois' game and what he could do for the Jets, his age, right? Like, he's still in his mid-20s. So I think everybody would look at Dubois and they would say, yeah, this is a guy that you sign long-term. But the reality is the big...
Let me stop you for a second, Ezzy. You talk about that. Would you give if Pierre-Luc Dubois comes and says, I want 8 years and $10.5 million?
Whoa, Drew, you're a little high there, but I mean, I don't think he's a $10.5 million a year player. I mean, I haven't crunched the numbers. I mean, what is he making? $7.5 million this year, something like that.
I mean, a little less than that.
No, it's in the sixes.
In the sixes, exactly.
Yeah, no, $10.5 million, Drew, is too high. I mean, if you're asking me my opinion,
yeah,
I don't think it would. That's not only is that high, I think that's quite a bit high. Like, I would have him more in the kind of $8 to $9 million range. Like, I would have to crunch the numbers here, right? I didn't prepare anything. Didn't prepare for a salary cap analysis, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if you sign him to 8 years or is it more like a 5 or 6 year deal. I don't know, but I think the point is, like, he's a big center, physical, scores goals, can set up goals. Like, he's a guy that should be a consistent kind of 30 to 35 goal, kind of 70 to 80 point guy for the majority of his career, right? But this is the point, though, I think, and you're right, Drew. Connor Hellebuck, if you were to rank the big four, and obviously, the big four we're talking about here is Wheeler, Scheifele, Dubois, Hellebuck. Hellebuck would clearly be number one. But, I mean, aside from Wheeler, who's towards the end of his career, all of these guys are extremely important players. Like, Dubois and Scheifele are your top two centers, even though Scheifele's playing on the wing right now. He's a center. Let's not get it twisted here, right? So, I mean, these are big moves coming up. And it's hard to say, if the Jets, Dave, are going to go through a complete rebuild or if they're just going to move a few players, right? Like, I don't anticipate, regardless of what happens with the Jets and the playoffs, I don't see, all four of those guys being traded. I just don't see that. Well, Hellebuck is definitely not being traded, but even Dubois, Scheifele, and Wheeler, I don't necessarily think that, if you're going to trade one of them, that means you have to trade all of them, right? Like, and we know that, Chevy, if it's Chevy who's making the trade, by the way, that's a whole other thing. To replace Scheifele and to replace Dubois is going to be hard to do, Dave, like on a one-to-one basis, especially if you're talking about Montreal. Nick Suzuki's the captain of the Habs. He's not going anywhere. We've talked about this, right? Is it Kirby Dach? Well, it wouldn't be Kirby Dach for Pierre-Luc Dubois straight up. You'd probably have to throw in a defenseman, a prospect, a draft pick. So what I'm getting at here is it's very difficult to predict who gets traded, who do they get traded to, what do they get traded for. But the reality is, if the Jets get knocked out in the first round, which I think is a real possibility. I mean, the Jets could obviously win a round or two, but let's say if the Jets don't go far in the playoffs, I don't know how you bring the same core back. I just don't think you do that. So I think there are changes coming. All I'm saying is I just think it's hard to say, yep, the Jets are going to get knocked out in the first round, Dave, and then Scheifele, Dubois, Wheeler, they're all gone.
let me read this quote, Dave, from Darren Dreger, and then I want you on this. I don't think Winnipeg has the appetite to go into a full-on renovation, so they're going to need quality assets coming back. I mean, and that's in reference to just trading Scheifele, trading Dubois, just sort of trading the core, if you will. I mean, if you're trading those guys, I'm not sure how you can avoid a full-on renovation. Who are you trading those guys for? Nobody's going to give you a equivalent asset that's younger, for a guy who's older. I just don't know that how the two of them align with each other. It seems like almost impossible to trade all these guys and that yet not go into a rebuilding phase. Now, it doesn't have to be tear it down to its roots like the Chicago Blackhawks rebuilding phase, but it seems to me to be impossible that you can do both based on the chatter and the likely return and things of that nature.
First of all, when did we start using the term renovation for this process? That's a new one for me. When Darren Dreger said it, I was like, that's an interesting one. But anyways, I don't want to.
Let's get Mike Holmes on the show.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't know that we became I can't think of an illegal something, but regardless, the point is, I heard Dreger's comments. Obviously, I transcribed them for a little website called legalcurve.com. So if you haven't heard them or if you haven't seen them, you can read them on the website. They were posted a couple days ago, and we have with a link to the interview he did on Montreal radio. But I think they're all tied together. I think that people are right in questioning, and Frank's comments were interesting about Connor Hellebuyck, and he's not wrong. But I think Connor Hellebuyck is fine. Like people say, Connor Hellebuyck wants to go back to the States. I don't think so. I think Connor Hellebuyck is fine. He's grown up in this organization. He's loyal to this organization, to the city, to the fans. I just think that, if you pay him what he's worth and you keep this team competitive, then Connor Hellebuck's going to be.
I would give $10.5 million for 8 years. It might be higher than that. It might be $11.5 million, but that big type of money, Drew, nobody would sneeze at that, Dave. You give Hellebuyck top. I think Drew has mentioned this before. You give him the Carey Price contract.
Yeah, look, and everyone points to Wheeler and says, look, at the end of Connor Hellebuck's career, that's going to be it could be an anchor, it could be this, especially with a guy who's faced as much rubber and has played as much as he has. But at the end of the day, if you look, I know that folks are excited about Dominic DiVincentis, he's had a phenomenal year with the Battalions, but at the same time, he's a ways away from being an NHL goaltender potentially. And so the fact
you're looking at a couple of years with the Moose, most likely.
Yeah. And he's still got some junior hockey left in him. Right. So, you've got, so you got some time before you're talking about him. Remember Connor Hellebuck's as he a 2012 draft pick, right? Yep. So it takes time for goaltenders, and we know that. And so the fact of the matter is that Connor Hellebuyck is a guy, I think, and again, like I said, I'm not 100% on this, but I think that he'd be happy to stick around as long as he knows that this team is contending. And Darren Dreger's comments didn't just talk about Pierre-Luc Dubois. He also mentioned Mark Scheifele, right? He mentioned the two of them as potential trade options. And we generally know that Darren Dreger, if he says it, it's coming from probably within the Jets organization at the top level, right? So, that to me is the interesting thing. And again, like I said, how this shakes out, because, and Darren said it in the piece, if you lose your center depth, who are you replacing him with? Who is your center of the future? Because it's not clear. It's not any of these young guns who are like Cole Perfetti. Again, they've been playing him on the wing. We saw him at center with the Moose, but the Jets have played him on the wing. The Jets did the same thing with Jack Roslovic, right? The Jets did the same thing with a lot of these young players. They put them onto the wing, even though they're center. They don't allow them to kind of earn their stripes in that way with the NHL. So if you don't have Mark Scheifele, if you don't have Pierre-Luc Dubois, what does your up the middle look like for the Winnipeg Jets? I would suggest you're up a creek with no paddle without centers. So center depth is the hardest thing.
Cole Perfetti can play center and Chaz Lucius can play center, but the point you're trying to make, Dave, is these guys are so young in their NHL careers that you're not ready for these guys to be your first line and second line centers yet.
And I don't think they're going to play center at the NHL level.
That's what I'm saying. I don't know if even Perfetti and Lucius are guys that the Jets prefer to use up the middle.
I think those are wingers.
Those are wingers. But they're more importantly they're too young to replace Scheifele and Dubois, right?
Well, then let me ask you this. Let's flip the question around. Given what you've seen from the Jets, let's go on the hypothetical. Say the Jets can re-sign to contract extensions Hellebuyck, Dubois, Scheifele. Forget about Wheeler, because I don't think there's much interest in that, given that, his age, and this very well could be his final NHL contract. But given what you've seen of this team in the last 3 or 4 months, why would you want to re-sign all 3 of those players?
That's the more important thing. To me, it's not necessarily, about how much money Dubois or Scheifele or Hellebuck are going to get. It's that, is that who you want to build your team around? Like you said, Drew, over the next, let's call it 5 to 8 years, right? Because you can only sign a guy to a max 8-year contract, right? I guess you throw in the extra year for Dubois because he's got 1 year of RFA remaining. But you're right, and I think that is at the core, to use a pun intended there. I mean, I think the defense needs to be revamped, and I think that's again something that is kind of lost a little bit here, because we're talking about a goalie and 3 forwards, right? Mm-hmm. But you've seen like Dylan Sandberg, for example, take a really nice step in his development, right? Like he's established himself as a top 6 defenseman. Morrissey having his best career year, but we know Neil Pionk on the right side, and I always go back to the right side. I like Dylan DeMello on the right side, but I think you need an improvement in your top 4 on the right side. So are you going to trade, one of Scheifele and Dubois to bring in ideally a top pairing defenseman? I don't know, because then it leaves a significant hole up the middle. I would think that the Jets would want a center in return for either one of Scheifele and Dubois. But to me, that's this has to be part of the conversation, Drew, about rebuilding this team, right? You've got some good pieces there. But again, how high do you think Ville Heinola's ceiling is, right? He's going to be part of that left side. But, we know that this year he spent the majority of the year with the Moose. So that has to be factored in terms of, where is this team going? How you have to assess how good are your forwards? How good is your defense? How good is your goaltending? Which we obviously know the number 1 goaltender is one of the best in the league. But David Riddick hasn't been that great of a backup. So that's another issue too. Are you going to bring in a backup? But based on what you're saying, Drew, yes. I don't think that I think that the Jets need to move on from the Scheifele Wheeler core. Period.
Dave, I mean, same question, given everything we've seen, given the tailspin, given the team's inability to pull itself out of it. I mean, every team's going to go through a slump. So let's not confuse a slump with a tailspin, because what the Jets have been in is a tailspin, right? Given all the noise, given the eye roll. And I mean, I know that some people are saying the eye roll is blown out of proportion. Maybe it wasn't in response to Mark Scheifele's comments, but it was in response to the question. I don't know.
To be honest with you, Drew, that was my interpretation of it, because based on his answer, and based on his qualification the next day, which could simply have been him playing damage control. Right. But when the entire hockey world went, whoa, and I was like, in my head, I was like, is it whoa, or was he just kind of like, no, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go there and start an issue with one of my players. And because again, he cut it off pretty quick. So again, like I said,
he's not going to throw fuel on the fire. But I mean, you listen to forget about the eye roll. Then take bonus out of it completely. Look at DeMello's comment and look at Scheifele's comments, and tell me that both of those guys who are in the same dressing room are on the same page as to how the team has to succeed. I mean, they're clearly not.
Yeah, one's a defenseman, one's a forward. They have different ways of thinking of how to use the puck. But look, at the end of the day, let's just stick with what your question is, as opposed to all the we're not body language experts here on cable networks right now, trying to assess what this means and what that means, because we would fail miserably. I can't even read your body language right now, Drew. Although you look kind of annoyed. So maybe I'm doing a good job of understanding it. But I think if you just focus on the question, it is a good one. I again would say that if this team is firing optimally, like they seem to be doing at the beginning of the year, then yes, this is what this team could have been, which is a center depth team with nice wing pieces, a great goaltender, and decent defense. And now the problem for this Jets team is the overbalance. You're overbalanced on the left side, you're underbalanced on the right side, and that's one of the biggest things. And Ezzy's 100% right. If you've got this glut, sorry guys, and not only is this glut already here this year, next year it's even worse, because now Declan Chisholm is not going to be waiver exempt. So now you have to figure out what you're going to do with a guy who's an AHL All-Star, obviously dealing with a high ankle sprain. So he's
going to play for the Habs. Obviously, that's just what the Jets do. They lose young players, young defensemen for nothing on waivers to the Habs.
But the point I'm making is that as he just put out there, right? You've got Josh Morrissey not going anywhere. Brendan Dillon is solid. Dylan Sandberg solid. So your left side is solid. Right, it's pretty good.
And throw in Heinola, who, if you're keeping Heinola, he's got to be playing in the NHL next year. You would agree, Dave. This is the last year Heinola is going to be playing regular minutes in the A.
But the problem, Ezra, is that his contract allows him to be waiver exempt next year. So he could be in the AHL next year. I agree with you. It's not a great situation. It's just the reality of things that he gets to be the low man on the totem pole. But at the end of the day, it still puts you with Logan Stanley, still puts you with Declan Chisholm, still puts you with Leon Gavanke. You know, Leon Gavanke scored more goals for the Moose now and will probably than any by the end of the season by any right side, any defenseman, period. So you've got all of these situations with players, and that's why I said the Jets did themselves a disservice by going into this slide, because what they could have done was brought some of these guys up at the end of the season, let them get into some NHL games, do some talent evaluation at the NHL level, but they can't obviously afford to do that. But the reality for me is, so you've got the left side locked up. Dylan DeMello, good second pair, solid second pairing guy. The biggest hole for this Jet team is that right side. So again, if you're going to remove from the center depth, you need to kind of fill that right side top pairing, you know, and we, at one point, the Flames were talking about getting rid of Mackenzie Weegar. We're like, well, okay, there's a right side top pairing guy you could get. We would look great alongside Josh Morrissey for the next 8 years. But at the end of the day, the other option is what they should do. And I know they've done this a little bit with the Moose, is try flipping like they did, like Nate Schmidt talked to me about and talked before about when he got to Washington and the entire left side was full, he flipped over to the right side. So Ville Heinola, flip Declan Chisholm, one of those guys, flip over to the right side to add some depth to this organization, to allow them to maybe make a move on that back end and create a little space. But again, that's not really answering your question, Drew. I'm just saying the problem is that you what you're going to do is you can't really, what are you going to do? You're not going to get a similar center. So you're not trading away Scheifele and Dubois. You're building. You got to maintain one of them.
But why? I mean, if you're not going to re-sign them,
because Mark, look, of course. First of all, for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're still under contract for one more year. So the reality is that you. I'm not saying you go in as own rentals, because that's lunacy. You can't afford, from a Jets perspective, to lose them for nothing. You have to trade them if they're not signing long term here. Mm-hmm. If you choose not to sign them, or they tell you they're not signing, then you, before the trade deadline next year, and oftentimes we see this kind of stuff happen at the draft, so that's another situation. But I'm just saying that there's an opportunity to either do it at some point within the next year. But yeah, you'll have to evaluate that. But yeah, look, ultimately, if Pierre-Luc Dubois decides he wants to be here, and Mark Scheifele decides he wants to be here, I have no problem. Sorry, guys. I know people want to, rip on 55 or rip on 80, but at the end of the day, they're two pretty good center depth. They were two pretty good centers in the NHL. Throw them with Adam Lowry, throw them with another center, and that gives you very good center depth, which is what you need to win in the Stanley Cup.
Look, on paper, your argument makes sense. If you can re-sign those guys, I understand why the Jets would do so. I just don't know why then the results would be any different than they currently have been for the last few months. That's my issue. And
they won't be if you don't bring in some added scoring depth up front, and you improve the defense, in my opinion. To me, I keep going back to the defense. And Dave's right. Like, I like Brendan Dillon. I like Nate Schmidt. I like Neil Pionk, but it's just, it's not an extraordinary defense. Like, it's an average group of defensemen when you break down the numbers. It just is, right? And Connor Hellebuck, we know, like, he makes up for, a lot of the warts on the Jets back end. Just like we've talked about it. Like, the Red Wings game, guys, at this point is the outlier in the second half of the season, right? Like, the Jets have given up a lot of goals and they haven't scored a lot of goals, right? So to me, the defense has got to be better. But yeah, Drew, I mean, I think there's something to be said that, especially throw in Wheeler in there, and he's got 1 year left on his contract, and it's probably going to be a situation where you probably have to retain half the salary, right? But I think you have to make the decision, like, again, answer the question, where are you going here? Like, are you going to be a team that competes for the Stanley Cup next year? Well, if you're not, then is the goal just making the playoffs? Because I don't think that's a good goal for this team.
That's my point. You can't be half pregnant. It's got to be one way or the other. And I don't know what re-signing these guys and keeping this core together necessarily does for you. At the same time, look, it's a conundrum, and I don't know that the Jets have the right person in charge to make that decision. And I don't know that necessarily, there's going to need to be a significant reconciliation when this season ends to figure out what the strategy and what the approach is for this team. And it's really going to be, I think the Jets truly are probably the most fascinating team come this offseason. The Jets, and you mentioned it when we talked to Frank earlier, the Flames as well. Very interesting off seasons ahead. But of course, regular season games still to come, and maybe playoff games for one of those two teams. We will see. Coming up next, Sean Reynolds, Rennie himself, joins us on the show. Don't go anywhere. Saturday morning, the Illegal Curve Hockey Show rolls on our YouTube channel and all of our social media platforms.
Keeping Winnipeg laughing for over 30 years. Rumors, Canada's longest running comedy club, bringing you the biggest laughs from the best comedians on the planet. Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Jon Stewart, Dennis Miller, Brad Garrett, the greats, and all the up-and-comers too. When was the last time you laughed out loud? Make it a great night out with friends, or book your office or birthday party. Even a fundraising event at Rumors. Get all the details and dates on upcoming shows at rumorscomedyclub.com.
Hi, Ez. A strange question for you. But why are you lying on the ground being crushed by a piano?
Well, Drew, I definitely tried to carry this baby grand piano down the stairs by myself, and somehow I failed miserably.
Right. Yeah, sorry. That was a silly question on my part. My apologies. Would you like me to call Rolly's Transfer Moving and Storage to help you move the piano? They are the most experienced piano moving company in Winnipeg, after all.
Yes, please call Rolly's and hurry. This piano is very, very heavy.
Rolly's Transfer Moving and Storage offers stress-free residential moving services while taking great care of your personal belongings, including your piano. At Rolly's, no job is too big or too small. For more information, visit rollys.com.
Hi, it's Drew from Illegal Curve here. Selling your home can be stressful, but it wasn't for me. Thanks to my friends at Zappia Group Realty, they made the process so easy. My home sold within 48 hours and with multiple offers. Zappia Group Realty took care of everything with their exquisite customer service and attention to detail. If you want to sell your home for more in less time, get started by talking to Frank and Mauro Zappia of Zappia Group Realty. Online at zappiagroup.com.
Hey, Drew.
Ezzy, whoa, what a smile!
Yeah, I got my crowns done at Linden Market Dental Center, and they whiten my teeth.
I see.
They're so bright that every time I smile, they go,
"We have hockey tonight. Do you have a mouth guard to protect those pearly whites?"
"I sure do."
Whoa, they even ting through the mouth guard.
Linden Market Dental Center covers all your dental needs from restorative to cosmetic dentistry and will fit you with a sports guard for that active lifestyle. 877 Waverly. See lindenmarketdental.com.
So you're a pizza person, you married a wing person, but somehow your kids are salad people. You can't pick your fam, but you can pick your BP meal deal, starting from $18.99 for takeout or delivery at bostonpizza.com.
Bottom of hour number 2. Welcome back to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show, the Illegal Curve post-game show tomorrow evening, 8:45, after the yet another massive tilt for the Winnipeg Jets as they face off with the New Jersey Devils. And of course, a little bit later than that, it will be the Kenny and Rennie post-game show with Sean Reynolds, our next guest here on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. He did say that you're on your way. You tweeted that, which I assume was meant to be a message last night, but you are literally on your way somewhere as you join us from the car, Sean. Good morning. It's a pleasure to see you, good friend.
I'm doing great. It's good to see you guys. Thanks for having me on.
It's our pleasure, Sean.
Are you on 317 right now, Sean?
No, I'm in the parking lot of Acora's. I was out with the family for breakfast, and things kind of got switched around. You guys let Frank Seravalli big time me and steal my slot, so I had to walk away from breakfast with the family so I could spend some time with you three lovely gentlemen.
Oh boy!
That. Well, after Elliot big timed Scott Billick and gave you stolen valor credit for the line of questioning, though we have to, payback is a biatch, as they like to say, right?
Yeah, I don't know that it was as much about stealing credit for me as it was taking an opportunity to take a shot at me, and he was just trying to find any way into it as he could. So I feel like I'm getting it no matter what happens here, guys. I don't know.
All love, that. All love, first and foremost. Obviously, we appreciate you departing the family to join us. last night's game for the Jets, just a huge victory, a much needed easy win. It wasn't like pulling teeth. It wasn't like, a bamboo shoots under the fingernails for this team. For once, they went out, they got a commanding lead, and then rolled home to an easy victory by that 6-2 margin. Do you think that this is more than just one game, or is it just, the team getting one victory that they needed, or do you see signs of them maybe breaking through on the other end after last night's victory?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's tough to tell with a game like that because, as much credit as I want to give the Winnipeg Jets, and they deserve credit, they went out, the lines that were put together went out and they all showed well. They all blended well. You saw a lot of chemistry. So there's definitely signs there. But, Detroit was terrible yesterday. Like they were a bad hockey team yesterday, and that was a bad hockey team that's been a bad hockey team for the last quarter of the season right now, coming off of a back-to-back in which, hey, they're great, and they knocked off the Carolina Hurricanes, but it looked like they spent everything they had. And they're starting their third-string goaltender, a 31-year-old goaltender with 21 games of NHL experience. That should tell you everything that you need to know about his acumen. So it's tough to tell, because the one thing I'll say about the Winnipeg Jets, and I've always thought this, and I think you see it a lot earlier in the season, if you want to play a certain style of wide open game against the Winnipeg Jets, that's what the Winnipeg Jets love to play, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to play wide open pond hockey with them, which is what we were seeing the Detroit Red Wings play last night, the Jets will burn you, and they love playing that style of game. I think the biggest challenge that the Jets have seen down the stretch here is that style of game that is played a lot more often earlier in the season has not been played and isn't played that often by teams, especially playoff caliber teams, as the season goes on. And the challenge that I always think that the Jets run into is when teams interrupt their flow. That's when you kind of see whether or not they're willing to fight through it or not. The Jets weren't asked to fight through anything last night. The Jets were basically got to play the kind of game they wanted and go about it against a goaltender that wasn't that sharp, or maybe was sharp, but that's as good as he's able to muster. So I'll say this again, I don't want to take anything away from the Jets. In the position that they were in that game, the Jets played that situation as good as they possibly could. And we haven't seen the Jets do a lot of playing the best they possibly can in a position, right? They go up against San Jose, who's last place in the league at the time they play them, and play right down to their level. I saw that game and I thought, these are two teams that look like they are perfectly matched for each other. I don't subscribe to the idea that the Jets were the way better team in that game and got goalie. They gave up just as many high danger chances as the San Jose Sharks did. They deserved their fate in that game. So for them to come out and take advantage of a Detroit team that looked tired and really has lost faith in its season at this point, good for them to do that. But now, can they carry that forward against the New Jersey Devils? It sure looks like they can by the way they play. But the one thing we know about this team is consistency has not been there down the stretch. And every once in a while you think, okay, here they are. They're about to wake up. And then they go out and lay an egg the next game. So Sunday, I can't tell you guys one way or another what I think is going to happen. Well, I can tell. I think that they're doing a little bit better. And yes, they're getting the Devils on the back end of a back-to-back, so they've got to take advantage of that. It's as good a situation as they could hope for playing against the Devils at this point in the season, at home with them coming off a back-to-back and traveling. But whether or not they'll be able to take advantage of it, guys, my guess is not as good as anyone's.
Sean, we obviously have to talk about the line combinations, and it's, I find it funny, at least we always talk about what we're going to talk about before the show starts. And it's almost always the forward line combinations because obviously, there's not a lot to touch on when it comes to the D pairs and the goaltending, because we know that Connor Hellebuyck is almost always going to be in the starter's net, right? But the big move obviously being Mark Scheifele moving to the wing along with Kyle Connor and Pierre-Luc Dubois, and then Nemesnikov with Ehlers and Wheeler, Nino Niederreiter obviously on the third line with Adam Lowry and Mason Appleton. And, everything seemed to work out. Like you said, aside from not getting a power play goal, 6 goals, 6-2. That pretty much went as good as you could script it, right? But I guess, what do you think of those line combinations, for the next 6 games? Forget the playoffs here for a second. You like Nino Niederreiter, that he can, add a little offensive punch. Nemesnikov, we know he's that Swiss Army knife, like that Michael Frolik type of player. But realistically, Sean, how long can we expect Mark Scheifele to be playing on the wing here?
Well, based on his comments from the last game, after the last game, maybe it won't last a period against the New Jersey Devils. Like I was truly like, I know we've been wondering where Mark Scheifele's head is at and where his game is at, but last night was a situation where the first line worked and the second line worked and the third line worked, right? And so in order to get those combinations, Mark Scheifele got moved to the wing, and for a lot of that game took on center duties. Like really, you know, he starts out and he's on the wing, but it's really kind of a splitting the job with Pierre-Luc Dubois. So it's not even like it's a centerman being taken away entirely from the position he loves. It's a centerman who's like splitting those duties with another centerman, and they had great success in that game. So you would have expected, you know, Mark Scheifele, when he was asked about the situation, to be like, listen, guys, whatever works, and this sure looked like it worked, that's what we'll do. Let's make this work here. But with the caveat of Rick Bowness, which I thought was so weird and so strange, that he said before the game that, well, we talked to Mark and we talked about moving him to the wing and told him as soon as you're not happy on the wing, we'll move you back to center, which I just thought, like, this does not sound like, you know, a coach talking to a player. This sounds like a coach trying to, you know, convince a player to try and get on board with something. But the idea that Mark Scheifele will be moved back to center whenever he feels like he's not getting this anymore. What I heard from Mark Scheifele after that game yesterday was not, listen, this worked and whatever works for this team, let's just stick with it. Let's not break what's already working. What I heard from him was a guy who was like, yeah, it's weird going to the wing, and he wasn't totally sold on it. And a guy who his coaches already said, if he wants to go back, sounded like a guy to me last night, guys. I don't know what you took away from that, but sounded to me like a guy who already has 1 foot in that center position and 1 foot in the wing position. So how long it lasts, I don't know, because if what the coach is saying is true, that Mark Scheifele has the right to turn back to center whenever he wants. I mean, would we be surprised if he pulled that card and said, I don't like this anymore, I want to go back to center? And the crazy part about this is the Mesnikov, Ehlers, and Wheeler worked great last night. And why? Well, because it worked the last time they were together. And that line was doing a great job around the time that they went down on that Florida trip. They were working together great. And then they got torn apart. And it was interesting after the game when we were talking to Rick Bowness. I think he was irritated at me when I asked this question or responded with the question. But I asked him what that line needs to do for him, you know, to put them in a position where he doesn't break them up. And his response was, well, they keep doing what they're doing and we can't break them up. And I was like, yeah, but they were doing that. You already broke them up once already, right? And so I think he was irritated that I pointed that out. But I didn't like that one bit. Back at that time when that line was working, Pierre-Luc Dubois was out of the lineup. That's why it worked. I don't understand why in the history of the Winnipeg Jets, it seems that whether it's Rick Bowness or Dave Lowry before that, or Paul Maurice before that, there's always this, you know, there's injuries and a line is working and you discover this found gold, and then they throw it out the window as soon as someone comes back because they're trying to make the individual that comes back comfortable rather than go with what's working in the lineup. This Nemesnikov line is working. He's coming and does everything that he's been asked to do since he came in at the winner with the Winnipeg Jets. That line should not be touched. So if Mark Scheifele decides he doesn't like it on the wing anymore, I don't know where he's going to go. I doubt he's going to go to the third line and push Adam Lowry down to the fourth line. So I think the only options are that Pierre-Luc Dubois gets moved to the wing or the Nemesnikov line gets broken up even though they're working.
Sean Reynolds, our guest on this Saturday morning edition of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. You know Sean, of course, as Rennie from Kenny and Rennie and all the great work Sean does with our friends at Sportsnet.
Wow.
Nice.
What are you buttering me up for?
Nothing. Every now and then I just, you know, the good angel on my shoulder overtakes the devil on my other shoulder, and the angel won out on that instance.
I know the feeling. Yeah.
You know, Sean, going back to the scrum with Rick Bowness on Thursday after practice, you asked him about stubbornness, about the team being stubborn. And what was your takeaway and maybe feeling most, hopefully people listen to your media available on illegalcurve.com, but you talked about that concept of stubbornness. And it's not just, it's ironic because when you were answering the previous questions, It's not just on the players. I think stubbornness is in effect. I think it's with the coaching staff as well. But you were obviously you were speaking with respect to the way the players were fulfilling their roles.
Yeah, well, first I want to give you guys a thanks because you guys are giving me credit for the questions that I actually asked after Elliot Friedman, gave away all of that credit that should have gone to Scott Billings. So I appreciate you guys being, in tune with my work in this. I asked that question because when I'd asked Adam Lowry about to me, what I thought was interesting was after the San Jose game, what I took away from that was that Rick Bowness was challenging the players that he didn't think were stepping up to the table, right? And that would not include a player like Adam Lowry, who's been like blood and guts trying to drag this team into the fight this entire time, that some players look to be absent, to be quite honest. And so when I asked him about, his coach's assertion that, there were players not giving their all effort-wise, Adam Lowry's assertion was, well, he doesn't think that it's that. He thinks that it's essentially a stubbornness in the way they play, that the Jets can be stubborn in the way they play. And to me, guys, that right there is him talking about the issue that has been plaguing this team with flashing light bulbs surrounding it in neon for years. This team found something that worked at the beginning of the year and chose to go back and play the way that things haven't been working for years. And I think the reason is, I've said this before, I think the Jets like to play a certain style of game. It's what we saw last night, wide open, swooping around the ice, making long cross-crease passes, finding seams, popping puck into the back of the net. That's what they like to do. And I think whenever their offense gets flowing, even if their offense comes in the way that it did at the beginning of the year, which was cram the front of the net, shoot from the point, pounce on loose pucks, ugly goals, once they start getting that feeling going, then they revert to that old style of play. And so I thought it was really interesting that Adam Lowry basically, I thought, pointed to the very heart of the issue with the Winnipeg Jets. When I asked Rick Bowness about it, he gave one of those answers where it's like, he's saying, by saying not very little, he's saying a lot. His eyes basically said, yep. And he just touched on it. It was another one of those, that's what we're dealing with kind of situations. But to me, that's the central issue. The thing I found interesting about that afterwards is the next day asking Kyle Connor if he thought that was the issue, and him essentially saying that he disagrees with that. And what that tells me is you've got certain players that know what the problem is and a coach that knows what the problem is. And then when other players are presented with that, they either don't know that's the problem, or they refuse, or they don't agree that it's the problem, or they refuse the idea that it's the problem because they're some of the players that are most stubborn in playing that style. To me, that whole thread of conversation with Adam Lowry and Rick Bowness and Kyle Connor, I'm wondering, I throw into that the idea of Mark Scheifele and his different philosophy that he had compared to what Rick Bowness had. And what I see is that that this team isn't on the same page, that there's certain players that think this is what we've got to do to get out of this, certain players that think this is what we have to do to get out of this. And what I see from that is there's a coach that's trying to put out a message. And I don't know what you guys saw. I know that you were there, Dave, but I thought that Rick Bowness really backpedaled after his comments in San Jose. He came out really hard in San Jose and then really soft pedaled everything. And not just soft pedaled, I think his message kind of changed somewhat. And that changing of that message tells me that he's trying to reach players in that dressing room that didn't agree with the other message. So I take a look at this and I think that the Winnipeg Jets as a dressing room are not on the same page. They're being pulled in a number of different directions. Maybe it worked out last night. Maybe last night is the first step in saying that a certain power block in the dressing room won out, and now that's the direction they're going to go in and say, well, we got to get in a unified direction. If it's not what the coach originally said, we're going to get on this one, because at least if we're all on the same page, we'll give ourselves a chance. But boy, oh boy, guys, with 6 games left in the season, to be in a situation where the room is still trying to figure out what direction to go in, if you want to find a reason why the Winnipeg Jets have been part of what is, potentially a monumental collapse out of the playoffs, that would be a big reason why.
Well, let me ask you this, Sean. Building on that comment, we know that the season has gone into a tailspin, and even if the Jets do squeak in, they're unlikely to do anything of significance. So that takes you to the offseason, and we know the contracts that are expiring pretty quickly, after another year. You look at this core, and let's say, Hellebuck, or forget about Hellebuck. Let's say Scheifele and Dubois come to you and say, we would like to re-sign. We'd like to spend another 5-6 years here as a member of the Winnipeg Jets. Given all the noise of the last couple of years, given everything you've seen from this team for the last couple of years, why is re-signing these guys the right decision when it's been so difficult to achieve really anything with this group as currently constructed?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. There's right now, I don't think your hypothetical suggests that they would be staying around here, and I don't think that that's happening. But regardless of the hypothetical, if that was what they were doing, you're asking the proper question. Should the Winnipeg Jets be re-upping with a core that now, regardless of whether the Jets make the playoffs or not, have shown their capability of kind of falling entirely apart, right? Like they did it last year. They're doing it this year. And let's be honest, when we talk about this core, the first game of the season, we did a Wednesday night hockey, that game that the Jets pulled out an overtime victory against the Colorado Avalanche. And we showed the direction that these two teams went in over the last number of years. And the Colorado Avalanche just went up and up and up. Every year since 2018, the Winnipeg Jets have got worse. Right. So you ask the proper question, what would it take to sign those players? And if you are signing them, what's the expectation that you're going to bring the band back and that they're going to turn everything around? That the signs tell us that that's not going to happen. And that's why I think, someone said to me last night, well, are you sure we can't convince Pierre-Luc Dubois to stay? And I was like, well, I mean, everything I've heard, the answer is no. And they said, well, what if we throw like $12 million at him a year for like 7 years? And I was like, why would you do that? Why would you pay someone? Why would you overpay someone to stay someplace that they didn't necessarily want to, and put yourself in a situation where you've taken a player and grossly overpaid that player just to stay? Like this is, it needs to make sense financially for them to stay there. So if the Jets get into a situation where they're overpaying players just to stay, then you better make sure that they're the right players that are figuring this out. And it's hard to tell what that is right now because the Jets fell apart last year, were a train wreck on their way out of the playoffs. And guys, if they fall out of the playoffs this year, and so much of this is going to hinge on that game Wednesday, but if they fall out of the playoffs, even if they don't, why would you have faith that re-signing all of these players would end up in a different result? I go back to this and I say, I know that a lot of people disagree with me on this, and I understand why they do, because early on heading into the trade deadline, I had thought that the Jets needed to throw everything they had at this trade deadline. But when they started falling apart like this and we saw them returning to what they've been in the past, I had thought it would have been crazy to throw resources at the trade deadline, because why would you throw away your future for this team because of what they're showing you? And I contend, a lot of people will say, well, if they would have gone and got 3 or 4 or 5 more players, maybe they wouldn't be in this situation. But the very heart of this team is what's failing this team right now. And that wouldn't have changed if you would have gone and got 3 or 4 more players. And how would everyone be feeling right now if Kevin Cheveldayoff would have gone and mortgaged the future and sent away Chaz Lucius and Rutger McGroarty and a first-round pick and maybe Cole Perfetti to bring a whole bunch of guys in right now? And the very guys at the heart of this team have continued on to go 19 games without a goal, 17 games with only 1 goal. Like this core has shown, this is a long-winded way of me saying this core has shown us what it's capable, both good and bad. And the good, for the most part, is pretty distantly in the rearview mirror. And the bad has been front and center both last season and for the last half of this season. When people show you who you are, who they are, you got to pay attention.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads nicely into, this is going to be the last question, Sean, because we want you to rejoin your family for breakfast. But, I had to ask you.
The show's coming to an end. Don't try and butter.
No. We're going to let you go a few minutes before we wrap up, Sean.
Yeah, Sean, actually look at the private chat if you want. We did say we want to let Sean go. This is going to be the last one so he can rejoin his family.
Yeah. So, in related news, if your wife needs a good family law attorney, we know a few that we can send her way.
Dan Minuk is a great family lawyer, Dave's brother of course. And Dave's dad wasn't a bad lawyer either. But no, just
so you're trying to drive some business to him. I see what's happening.
That's all we're doing, Sean. That's why we had you on, to drive business. But no, Dylan DeMello is the guy I wanted to ask you about, because obviously huge snipe yesterday versus the Red Wings at home. And it's recency bias, but I think you would agree, like, he has been so solid all year long. Just how nice was it, though, for him, but also for, how nice has it been to see him? And he's obviously an underrated player, I think. Dave mentioned this on the Illegal Curve Twitter yesterday, set a career high for points, had a goal and an assist. I just think, sometimes he's underappreciated, especially with, JMO out of the lineup. I thought he really stepped up and was a real leader out there yesterday versus the Red Wings.
Yeah, so I had a good conversation with him. We did a story on one of our broadcasts. I can't remember if it was a hockey night in Canada or not, but I talked to Dylan DeMello about, like, the mindset that goes into becoming a more offensive player. Like, does it just happen? Do things just roll your way? Or was this like an intention for him to come in this year? And he said, absolutely it was. And I found it a really interesting conversation, because his take on becoming more offensive was, he thought he'd really locked down his defensive game and taken it to, a place where he's at the top of his game defensively. So why not add in that element? But B, the other part of it is, after the conversations they had with Rick Bowness, and Rick Bowness made it clear that he wanted Josh Morrissey to come into this year and be a more offensive threat this year. The philosophy that Brendan Dillon came in with was, if I can cover him off, right, and make sure that he knows he can jump into the play and activate and get up and be that defensive guy, that's one thing. But if I can add an offensive element to this too, what that means is the defenders aren't going to be able to just lock in on Josh Morrissey because he's the offensive threat and I'm just sitting here making sure no one goes back the other way. If I can add an offensive element into this as well, then what it's going to do is it's going to force the defenders to respect me and my ability to put the puck in the back of the net or generate offense. It's going to force people to my side of the ice, and that's just going to open up the ice that much more for Josh Morrissey. So his idea was, if I become a more offensive player, it's going to allow Josh to become a more offensive player. And I think it's one of the unheralded things that we should be talking about more in this potential Norris Trophy winning run that Josh Morrissey is on right now, is that Dylan DeMello has played a huge role in this, in allowing him to play freely because he's got him covered off defensively, but he's also opened up more ice for him by being a more offensive threat. And I thought the fact that Josh Morrissey was out of the lineup last night, and the mindset of Dylan DeMello is not, let's just survive while Josh is gone. It's like, hey, Josh is out. We need someone to pick up the slack for him. And he goes out and does that. I just think Dylan DeMello's mindset has been the mindset of a winner this year. And good on him to find ways to grow his game and go about it in a really smart, cerebral way, that he had a very specific strategy to do it and play off another player. Like, how good of a teammate is that? How good is that individually for him to build that plan? Dylan DeMello put the work in, put the thought in, and he's reaping the rewards, and he deserves it.
Another great appearance on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show from our good friend Scott Billick, doing a great job this morning.
I didn't deserve that, but I guess Sportsnet overall did. So
the devil won out that time. The devil beat the angel on that one there, Sean. Sean Reynolds is our good friend. You know his work on Sportsnet, and of course on Kenny and Rennie as well. Sean, go have breakfast with your family. Apologize to them on our behalf.
Yeah, just blame us, Sean. It's all our fault.
Yeah,
just Sportsnet and Daily Face have beef.
There you go, Frank. I'm coming for you, buddy. Here's the call out.
Thank you, Sean. Be well, buddy. We'll see you again around the rink tomorrow night.
Thanks, Sean.
There he goes, Sean Reynolds, our good friend, joining us this morning for a really fun appearance on the program. Always great to get.
Do you think he ordered yet? Because his food would definitely be cold. That was like a 25-minute segment.
You know, it's a great question, Ezzy. I don't know if he's ordered or not. We'll
get him back on the line. Let's find out.
Call him back, get him back in the car, and we'll see if we can find an answer to that. This has been a really fun show on this Saturday morning. Great to be back together for the full 2 hours, and me no longer being in prison like I was last week when I was broadcasting from Lawless's backyard.
Well, Drew, we're here every week. Like, you know, we don't take the vacations like you do. We're not wealthy industrialists like you are. So
yeah, Pennypacker.
We're after every Jets game, after every Saturday. Dave and I stick in Manitoba. We don't go anywhere. Right,
Oh,
Dave?
you know, what can I say? It's hard being the high roller that I am. We'll be back tomorrow evening with the Illegal Curve post game show following the Jets and the New Jersey Devils, 8:45 p.m. back here on our YouTube channel. A huge game as the Jets look to maintain their playoff positioning, maybe improve upon it. The Predators are in action in about an hour's time at home against the St. Louis Blues. The Jets will hit the ice at the Hockey for All Center. So that would be, I guess, open to the public. I'm not sure if it's a full practice or if it's a optional, but they're hitting the ice in about an hour's time, if I'm not mistaken. All the latest from practice will be available on illegalcurve.com. That's, of course, your home for all your Winnipeg Jets, Manitoba Moose, and Winnipeg Ice news. The Ice winners last night in Game 1 of their Western Hockey League playoff series. No surprise there, given the juggernaut that they've been. It's really, you know, they're hoping to come through the first couple rounds unscathed before this competition really steps up in the latter rounds of the Western Hockey League as the Ice look to make a run to the Memorial Cup. I want to say a big thank you to Frank Seravalli and Sean Reynolds for joining us on the program. In case they missed any of the show or you missed any of the show.
They didn't miss any of the show, Drew. They were on the show.
Well, they may have missed other parts of the show, but in case anyone missed any part of the show, the immediate replay is on our YouTube channel. And of course, the podcast edition will be up very shortly thereafter. If you haven't already done so, leave us some feedback on the iTunes page. Leave us some feedback wherever you get your podcast. We always love hearing from you good folks about what you liked and what you didn't like, especially when that didn't like thing, it has to do with yours truly. Big thanks to our sponsors. They make this show, they make the post-game show, they make the website a possibility. Our friends at Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club, The Keg, Linden Market Dental Center, Grid Park, Betway, Rolly's Transfer, Tough Duck, Seagram's, and Boston Pizza support these fine businesses because of their continued support of Illegal Curve Hockey. As we mentioned, tomorrow night's post-game show, 8:45 p.m. We'll be back doing that. For Dave Minuk, for Ezra Ginsburg, I'm your host, Drew Mindell. If it's Saturday, it's the Illegal Curve Hockey Show live on YouTube.